20 minutes had never felt so long. Nelly remained beside Mr. Ade's bed exactly as she had promised. Neither of them spoke very much. The monitor continued its steady rhythm, and apart from the occasional footsteps in the corridor, the ward felt no different from any other night. Looking around, no one would have guessed that one nurse believed something was quietly unfolding while every machine insisted everything was fine. Mr. Ade broke the silence with a faint smile. "You've been watching me for almost half an hour. I hope I'm not making your shift more difficult." Nelly smiled back. "You're not." He studied her face for a moment before asking, "You still think something is wrong, don't you?" She paused before answering. "I think something has changed. I just can't tell you what it is." Mr. Ade nodded slowly. "Strange enough, that's exactly how I feel." Before either of them could say another word, the sound of the lift doors opening echoed down the corridor. A few moments later, quick footsteps approached the nurse's station, followed by a calm voice asking, "Room 7? Nelly stepped into the corridor just as Dr. Angela Okafor arrived. She looked composed despite being called out in the middle of the night. Behind her was Dr. Frank, who had returned as soon as he learned the consultant was coming in. After a brief greeting, Dr. Angela looked at both of them and said something neither of them expected. "I haven't read the notes." Dr. Frank looked surprised. She continued, "I don't want the chart yet." Then she turned to Nelly. "You've spent the night with him." "I haven't. Tell me about your patient." Nelly glanced toward the room before speaking. "His observations have stayed within range all night. That's what makes this difficult." "I'm not asking about his observations," Dr. Angela replied gently. "I'm asking about him." Nelly thought for a moment. "He doesn't look critically ill. He isn't describing severe pain. But every time I assess him, I feel like he's working a little harder to convince me he's comfortable. He keeps telling me he doesn't feel like himself, even though he can't explain why." Dr. Angela nodded. "That's what I wanted to hear." She walked into the room and greeted Mr. Ade before beginning her assessment. She wasn't in a hurry. She watched him answer simple questions. She noticed how he shifted in bed before speaking. She listened to his breathing without interrupting. Then she asked him to stand. Mr. Ade stood slowly. For a brief moment, he steadied himself against the side of the bed before taking a breath that was just a little deeper than the last one. It lasted only a second. Dr. Angela noticed. She turned to Dr. Frank. "The numbers aren't wrong," she said quietly. "They're just ahead of the story." Then she looked back at Nelly. "And she's been reading the story, not the numbers." Without raising her voice, Dr. Angela began giving instructions. "I want to repeat ECG immediately. Draw another blood sample for urgent cardiac markers. Call radiology and let them know we may need them before sunrise." The room became busy, but not chaotic. Every person knew what they had to do. As Dr. Frank stepped out to make the necessary calls, he paused beside Nelly. He looked at her for a moment before speaking. "I'm glad you made one more call." Nelly didn't answer. Her attention remained on Mr. Ade. For the first time that night, she no longer wondered whether she had overreacted. She wondered only one thing. Had they acted soon enough? Within minutes, the 7th floor moved with a sense of purpose that had been absent all night. Blood samples were rushed to the laboratory, the ECG was repeated, and radiology was placed on standby. No one spoke louder than necessary, yet everyone understood that the atmosphere had changed. This was no longer a routine observation. The team was now searching for something that had managed to stay hidden. Dr. Angela remained beside Mr. Ade while the investigations were underway. Instead of watching the monitors, she watched him. She noticed the extra second he needed before answering a question, the slight effort behind each deeper breath, and the way he instinctively rested his hand against the side of the bed whenever he changed position. None of those observations would have raised an alarm on their own, but together they painted a picture that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The ECG was the first result to return. Dr. Frank studied it carefully before handing it to Dr. Angela. She compared it with the tracing taken earlier that day, then looked back at Mr. Ade. The difference was subtle, small enough that it could easily have been dismissed a few hours earlier, but no longer small enough to explain away. "We're seeing the beginning of something," she said quietly. "Let's not wait for it to announce itself." Additional medication was ordered immediately, and the team prepared Mr. Ade for urgent imaging. As they worked, another call came from the laboratory. The blood results had arrived sooner than expected. Dr. Frank read through them once, then a second time before lowering the report. "They've started to move," he said. Dr. Angela nodded. There was no satisfaction in being right, only relief that they had chosen to look again when there was still time to act. Mr. Ade looked from one face to another and finally asked the question no one had wanted him to ask. Is something wrong? Dr. Angela stepped closer to the bed and answered with reassuring honesty. We found something that wasn't obvious earlier tonight. The important thing is that we've found it now, and we're already treating it. Mr. Ade held her gaze for a moment before nodding. So, Nelly was right to worry. Dr. Angela smiled gently. Nelly was right to pay attention. As preparations continued, Dr. Frank walked over to where Nelly was updating the patient's notes. He waited until she looked up before speaking. When you called me the first time, every piece of evidence supported the decision I made. I know, Nelly replied. When you called again, I still believe the evidence. He paused before continuing. You weren't looking at the evidence. You were looking at the patient. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was no apology and no need for one. Both understood that medicine was never about proving who was right. It was about making the next right decision. A porter arrived to transfer Mr. Ade for imaging, and the team moved with quiet efficiency. As his bed rolled out of the room, he reached for Nelly's hand. I don't know what you saw, he said, but thank you for not ignoring it. She smiled, squeezed his hand gently, and watched as he disappeared down the corridor with the rest of the team. The 7th floor became quiet again, but it was no longer the same quiet that had filled the hospital an hour earlier. This time, it carried the feeling that one difficult decision had changed the direction of the night. Only one question remained. Had they acted early enough to change the ending? Just before sunrise, the team finally received the news they had been working toward all night. The treatment had worked. The complication had been caught before it became catastrophic, and Mr. Ade was stable. Around him, the pace of the ward slowly returned to normal, but for those who had been there through the night, nothing about it felt ordinary. A short while later, Mr. Ade was back in his room. As Nelly stepped in to check on him, he smiled. I guess that bookshelf will have to wait a few more days. Nelly smiled back. I think your grandson will be happy to wait. Before either of them could say more, there was a knock at the door. Mr. Ade's daughter hurried in, relieved to see her father sitting up. She thanked Dr. Frank for responding so quickly and Dr. Angela for coming into the hospital before dawn. Mr. Ade gently interrupted her. Before you thank anyone else, he said, looking toward Nelly. Thank the nurse who refused to believe I was fine just because the chart said I was. His daughter turned to Nelly, her eyes filling with emotion. Thank you for staying. Nelly simply smiled. It was exactly where I needed to be. As the morning handover began, Dr. Frank found Nelly outside the room. You made the right call, he said. Nelly shook her head. We all did. Dr. Frank smiled. No, I trusted the chart. You trusted the patient. Last night reminded me that good medicine needs both. Before the conversation could continue, Dr. Angela joined them. There will always be data, she said. There will always be test results, charts, and protocols. They matter because they save lives. She paused for a moment. But data only tells you what is happening. She looked at Nelly. Clarity comes from noticing what the data hasn't explained yet. The corridor fell quiet. Outside, Lagos was beginning another day. Cars returned to the roads. Businesses opened their doors, and thousands of people passed the hospital without ever knowing how close one ordinary night had come to ending very differently. That night became one the hospital would never forget. Not because one nurse knew more than everyone else, but because she chose to pay attention when certainty hadn't arrived. The right decision isn't always the one supported by the most information. Sometimes it's the one that refuses to ignore what doesn't make sense. If this story made you see decision-making a little differently, share it with someone who needs that reminder. And subscribe to get more stories like this. Because sometimes, it only takes one story to help you see life a little more clearly.